Welcome and hello, I'm Fred KEMPE. I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this special edition of Atlantic Council Front Page, hashtag AC Front Page, our premier live ideas platform for global leaders. Over the past 2.5 months, we've heard from a diverse array of such leaders: the NATO Secretary General, the IMF Executive Director, the presidents of Colombia, of Afghanistan, and the interim president of Venezuela, and people of that ilk and of that level. Today is a special edition as we are hosting 3 prominent leaders, each of whom has campaigned for a more equal and just society. This is a special edition of the show in celebration of Pride Month. Prime Minister Bettel of Luxembourg, Prime Minister Brnabić of Serbia, and former Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister now, the pronunciation is Tanushka, and before Taoiseach. If you like the Irish titles, they're wonderful. But just so you know, he's now the Deputy Prime Minister under a power sharing agreement that occurred this weekend, and then he'll become Prime Minister again in December of 2022 under that agreement. And they're here, all 3 of them, to discuss their outlook on LGBTI equality, COVID-19. They've done remarkably in their countries in attacking this pathogen, and the state of the transatlantic relationship, which we all care about at the very core of the Atlantic Council work. And then, of course, injustices seen around the world. So there's a lot to digest today. All these 3 leaders have been navigating the dramatic economic, political, and technological changes defined by the 21st century and exacerbated by the coronavirus pandemic. Prime Minister Bettel, you've been at the forefront for negotiating strong actions to support the economy in EU member states, calling for a common instrument for debt issuance. Prime Minister Brnabić, you've moved quickly at the onset of the pandemic to stabilize the Serbian economy, and just yesterday announced more targeted measures to combat the virus in Serbia while allowing some return to normalcy. A medical provider before entering the political realm, Mr. Varadkar has been lauded internationally for the way he has flattened the curve in Ireland. This weekend, as I said before, he's taken on a different role within the Irish government as part of a historic coalition deal, and we applaud you all for your accomplishments. I'm looking forward to your contributions ahead. Thank you for joining us today from wherever you are in the world for this important discussion with these pioneer leaders of the world, as well as of the LGBTI community. I encourage you to join in the conversation either by using the Q&A function on Zoom or by tweeting your questions using the hashtag #ACFrontPage. Now I'd like to turn to Damon Wilson, the Executive Vice President of the Atlantic Council, and he'll further introduce our distinguished speakers. Damon is one of the most important actors, voices, leaders in transatlantic relations, and is also a leader for the LGBTI community in his own right. He's an exemplary moderator to guide this conversation. We at the Atlantic Council are proud of what we've accomplished in terms of diversity at the Atlantic Council, though we know there's always more to be done. But we also like to demonstrate our conviction and diversity also in our external programming, and that's what we're doing today. So Damon, let me turn over to you.
Terrific, thank you, Fred. Welcome to all 3 of our honored guests, and welcome to all of those that are watching this broadcast live around the world. Thank you for being with us. Happy Pride. I'm delighted that we're hosting this special edition of Atlantic Council Front Page, featuring the most prominent LGBTI political leaders who are first and foremost known for their impressive records leading their nations through trying times today. We look forward to hearing their thoughts on their country's responses to the ongoing health crisis, their experiences in politics as members of the LGBTI community, as well as the direction of the transatlantic relationship so important to us here at the Atlantic Council. Prime Minister Xavier Bettel has been Prime Minister of Luxembourg since 2013, and he served as a member of parliament and a mayor simultaneously, giving him the benefit of seeing how local and national governments serve critical roles in public health decision-making. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for joining us today. And Prime Minister Ana Brnabić has been Prime Minister of Serbia since 2017. And her previous work in the private sector focused on developing Serbia's tech sector. This has informed her focus on digitalization as Prime Minister, and we'll turn to her to provide some insights into how technology can help us respond more effectively to the current pandemic and other challenges. Madam Prime Minister, thank you as well for being here today. And as Fred mentioned, until this past weekend, Leo Varadkar served as Taoiseach, Ireland's head of government, since 2017. As part of this new coalition deal that's taken effect, he's slated to return to that role, but he's with us today as TANAISTE, Ireland's second in command, if you will. And before entering politics, given he was a practicing physician, he's drawn on this medical background to help curb the impact of the pandemic. We'll get into some questions about that. Mr. TANAISTE, thank you as well for joining us. So I think I want to start our conversation discussing issue number one, the pandemic and our public health and economic recoveries. And then we'll address your role as leaders who are part of the LGBTI community, and close by turning to the transatlantic relationship and broader global challenges. And as Fred said, I want to remind our audience that we'll be taking your questions either over the Q&A function in Zoom, or you can tweet at us using AC Front Page. So with that, maybe I can turn to Prime Minister Bettel first and ask a question across all three of you as leaders. Europe is in the midst of reopening. We see this every day watching from the United States as we have some backsliding here in our country. And we just saw announcements out of the European Union today of travel being permitted within Europe from some countries, but not from the United States. This pandemic has triggered a lot of national reactions, the importance of taking care of your own people first. And yet a pandemic requires collective action, especially with your neighbors and especially in something like the European Union. How have you navigated the tension between responsibility to your citizens and being part of a broader global community, and particularly the European Union, Mr. Prime Minister? Prime Minister Bettel, I'll turn to you first.
Okay, so I have the honor to start. Thank you very much for organizing this happening and being able to speak about this global problem. And I always think that when we have global problems, we should find global solutions. But the fact is, we speak global, but we act usually individual. We saw it with material when there is something on my. You still hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I don't know. I don't see me, but that's okay. Sometimes better. So the fact is that even with material, we saw that there was a fight between the countries to get material. Even some countries bought material at the airport before entering the plane. The fact is, I don't want to give lessons, because I think that as European Union, we had also differences. If you see, for example, even in a country like France, that the east part of France was much more hit than the west part of France, so it was difficult to have 27 common positions to enter the confinement, and also for having less restrictions. The fact is, Sweden, for example, decided not to lock down. Some countries decided to lock down very quickly. That's what we did. And I think today, if we have not too bad results, it's because we acted directly and rapidly. But the worst thing was to close borders. And so when you directly ask the questions, act globally to close borders, or to give impression to people that, for example, we take the fever when you take the plane, was exactly the wrong messages. Was just to give to public opinion a good impression, because we exactly know you just need to take an Aspro or something, an aspirin, and you will get down the fever for a few hours. So before you take the plane, you take the Aspro. When you land, you have no fever, and afterwards you are sick. To close the border, to think that a barrier will stop the virus. So and we see that now. The race for the vaccine will be again a nightmare if we are not able to collaborate. We know that we have weak persons in all the countries, and we should act global, but think also global. And to tell you that if it will be a race afterwards, who will be the first one to be able to have vaccine for his own country without having solidarity with the weakest on the continent and in the world, I think it will be a bad image of all of us also on that topic. But we very often speak global, but we act local, even national, sometimes local.
Prime Minister Bettel, thank you. May I just follow up real quickly on Luxembourg is the home of the Schengen free travel arrangements across the European Union. And obviously at the beginning of this crisis, Germany closed its border. You've gone through a migration crisis and now a pandemic. Do you see the viability of Schengen and this free movement of people in Europe? Is that challenged? Is it in danger in the future of the European Union?
No, it's not challenged because we have to fight for it. It's for some people, the European Union, seen from outside, is just an economic project, and this would be the biggest error. Its values, first of all, we should not forget that and I'm very happy to see my friend Anna, that on my own continent, war was reality 25 years ago. Reality on my continent, 1.5 hours plane from my country, we had war on my own continent. But we should not forget that we're celebrating now the end also of Second World War, and just after Second World War, we had a few years later the European project. So it's the biggest peace project and the longest time my continent accepted, as I told you. But the European Union, where Germany and France were enemies, are around the table to build things together. And so we should not forget that also the free movement is a part of these values, and to say that to close the borders will be a solution of a problem is not the right message. But very often in politics, you don't say what is useful, but what is people like to hear. And so for me, it was an error to close the borders during this virus.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me turn to Prime Minister Brnabić in Belgrade and ask about your strategy in managing the coronavirus outside the European Union. You did have to pursue a national strategy for Serbia at this time. You had to lead your country through national elections during a pandemic. What was your approach to managing and mitigating the impact of the coronavirus in Serbia? And has your emphasis on digitalization as Prime Minister, did that factor into your response?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be able to be with you today and talk about these very, very important things. I think that we will all agree that we live in a very, very, very challenging times as we see the numbers are going up again almost immediately as we've started removing restrictions on kind of free movement of people, and we are in Serbia again faced with increasing numbers, the heavy burden on our healthcare sector, and I was just traveling around Serbia today to check up on some of the places where we have higher numbers and medical staff under serious strains. I would say just to make a parallel with one thing which was I think before this COVID crisis, one of the key crises in Europe and in the world as well, but Europe predominantly, and that was the migration crisis. At that point in time, also we saw as EU accession country that each European country or each EU member state has basically approached the migration crisis also individually, and what we lacked was a common European migration policy. And that hit us very, very hard even here in Serbia, because the issue that we had, for example, with migration crisis was that migrants were coming in to Serbia from the European Union member countries, not to stay in Serbia, but to go through Serbia further on towards the western part of the European Union. And as things progressed, in about 12 to 24 months, European Union has consolidated itself and found what can be described as a common migration policy. Now, in parallel with that crisis, I think this is the crisis in the crisis with COVID-19. We saw basically exactly the same thing happening all over again. So I think that, and as my friend Xavier said, not to teach lessons here, but I think that we should all learn from these crises and say, okay, we should have in Europe, on the European continent, common European response on these kind of global challenges, regardless if someone is EU member state or just a European nation, because as Serbia is, as any other Western Balkan countries, basically surrounded by the European Union. We hope to be members or become part of the EU fairly soon. I think the sooner the better. But even without us as officially members of the EU, I think for the European continent, a common European response to such kind of crisis is absolutely needed. Now, we also did similar things, and perhaps even more stringent than most of the countries, closed borders, we basically tried to stop as much of physical contact between people as possible in the country. And that has worked really well in terms of the results. We saw the numbers under control, very, very low mortality rates, but obviously the economy was hit very, very hard. Now, unfortunately, as soon as we started opening up, we saw the increase in numbers. So I think what kind of keeps me awake at night right now is that COVID is not going to pass. I think that we will have to learn how to live with this virus, at least until the vaccine is found. That's why we've pledged as Serbia 2.1 million euros as part of the common EU effort initiated by the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. We committed 2.1 million euros for the vaccine and support to healthcare sector. So again, I think that sticking together is more important than ever, although it's probably more difficult than ever. And finally, in terms of digitalization, my whole mandate was, I think, kind of almost completely about going digital here in Serbia, because I saw that as our stepping stone or shortcut to a much better, more prosperous future, especially for the young people in Serbia. And we made fantastic successes, I would say. And they helped us enormously during lockdown. Thanks to the electronic government services that we introduced, the government did not stop working at all. We continued providing services to citizens and businesses. For example, also the enrollment into kindergartens and schools, which is currently completely electronic, that wasn't stopped or hindered by the lockdown. And the same was with the education. I placed a lot of emphasis on digital education, digital classrooms, digital education material. And fortunately, when COVID hit us, we were able to literally switch to kind of homeschooling, online schooling over the weekend. So the kids did not lose even one single day in schools. Now we'll see how to continue. What I know, and I will finish with that, is that we will not be able to go back to a full lockdown as we used to. The economy would not survive, and then that would have a domino effect on the entire society. So we will have to look hard and think hard about the measures that we will have to reintroduce now.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll come back to the economy. I want to turn to the TANAISTE and Mr. Varadkar and ask, you came into this crisis equipped a little bit differently from most leaders with your background in medicine. But you also had the challenge of going through political transition in your country. How has Ireland, certainly in the United States, we look across and see an Ireland that's managed it better than here, or perhaps even significantly better than we see in the United Kingdom. What did you bring to bear in your strategy to help your country navigate this, informed by your own medical background, but also with this political uncertainty looming over Dublin?
Yeah, well, it was certainly a very strange period. We had elections on the 8th of February, which we lost, really. It was a three-way finish between three parties, but we weren't re-elected as a government. And while we were trying to put together a government, or even deciding whether we wanted to be part of government, all of a sudden the pandemic came to Ireland, and we just had to govern. And I know at the start people were referring to us as a caretaker government, but within a week or two, nobody was using that terminology anymore, because we had full executive power and we had to take major sweeping decisions that just had to be taken, and we did. Certainly for a couple of weeks, we were very badly affected by COVID, particularly our nursing homes, the old people's homes were badly affected. We've had about 1,700 deaths, but certainly in the last couple of weeks, we've really managed to get the number of new cases down to a very small number, maybe less than 10 every day, and no deaths some days, maybe 1 or 2 deaths other days. So we've been able to reopen the economy largely. Started reopening it 6 weeks ago, but yesterday all the restaurants and cafes and everything reopened except the pubs. It's unusual in Ireland for pubs to be closed, but if they serve food, they can open. But they can't open. Pubs, nightclubs, and casinos are the only things that aren't open, and they'll open on the 20th of July. We don't allow mass gatherings indoors of more than 50 people. But the kind of worry about us now, in many ways, is international travel, because even though we're part of the European Union, we use the euro. We're very much a pro-European country. We're also an island, so we're not part of the Schengen area, for example. And we have border controls at our ports and airports. We're a little bit concerned about restoring international travel. We're a connected country. We want people to be able to fly and travel again for business and holidays. But one real risk for us, which is less obvious for a country on the continent of Europe, is that the virus could come back into the country from America, Britain, France, other places where it isn't under control the way it is here. So that's kind of one of our major dilemmas at the moment. In terms of being a doctor, I think it probably just helped in the sense that helped on two levels. One, it didn't take long for me to understand what was happening. I had to brush up on my epidemiology and immunology, but that didn't take too long. And then maybe it was helpful in terms of communicating to the Irish people as to what this meant. I think it was definitely an advantage in those ways.
Terrific. And let me just follow up about the economy, maybe for Prime Minister Bettel and for the TANAISTE. The European Union's had a variety of packages come forward. We've had this debate about a 750 billion euro program for the European Union, in addition to national responses. Do you sense that the economic stimulus is sufficient to help a quick economic recovery in the European Union? Maybe Prime Minister Bettel first, and coming back to you, TANAISTE.
So the first thing is, we should not forget that if one of our country in Europe is going bad, it's taking all the other down. So it's a lose-lose situation if one is going bad. It's a win-win situation if we are all strong. So we should not forget that part. So we shouldn't ask, as I told you before, individually and egoist. We should be able to support countries, especially who have been hit more than others. The fact is, I think we should have a 3-rule system. The first rule is to be solidaire. I told you before, rules, values must be the backbone of the European Union. But the second one is, we have to be clear also that this money is used as an answer of this COVID-19 crisis, can be used for other stuff. This will be difficult to explain to our taxpayers, that this money is used for other things than to give an answer to the crisis. And finally, we should be able also to see if the rules are respected or not. And sometimes I've got the feeling that some of the countries would love solidarity without rules and control, and others would love to have rules and solidarity, rules and control without solidarity. So that's a problem. So we need to be balanced. I think this is an important step. It's a terrible crisis, and so we need also strong answers. And this will help the European economy. And it's the first time that we put in common grants and loans, and that we are able also to go on the international market as a European Union. So I think it's the first step in the right direction. But as I told you before, we need these 3 steps: solidarity, rules and control. And for the moment, they are still in the discussions, but I really trust Charles Michel to be able to find a balanced act where everybody will see that this common goal is in interest of all of us. If we should not think that it will help other countries if others are weak. I was already Prime Minister when we had the problem with Greece, with the euro, and it was also to save our common money, to save the euro, and not only to help Greece. It was also a common project to support, and we should avoid to have social crisis also afterwards in all the other countries. So to have a strong European economy helps all of us at the end of the day.
And Mr. Varadkar, you're connected not just by travel as an island, but Ireland's deeply integrated in a global economy, global supply chains. How are you seeing the European Union and your own national strategy for economic recovery playing out?
Yeah, I think what the European Union is doing is correct. And Ireland and Luxembourg were one of the 2 countries, one of 9 countries that advocated this approach very early on, that we should have this kind of Hamiltonian moment where the European Commission agreed to borrow money on behalf of all of the European Union and to use grants and loans from that to support the worst affected parts of the Union. And we did that knowing that Ireland and Luxembourg are wealthy countries in the European Union. So generally we'll end up paying more into any fund than we get in return. But that misses the point, because Europe is about values. And if other countries are doing well, then we do better. If countries are in trouble, they can pull us down if we don't help them. So we took that kind of solidarity, almost federalist approach to dealing with the economic aspect of the pandemic. And Italy, Spain, very badly affected. Not in any way their fault. They just happen to be the most affected and the first affected by the virus. For us, the economic situation is very worrying, I have to say. My new job is the Minister for Business and Employment. So it's my job, having got the country through COVID, to get everyone back to work. If you include, subsidized employment and government schemes and so on, we're well over 20% unemployment now. We had full employment in February, so it's a very serious economic crisis, and one that's very unequal as well, because it's the private sector workers who have lost their jobs, whereas the public sector did not, and it's mainly younger people and migrants in precarious employment who lost their jobs, whereas people working for big companies, multinationals, in the professions, in the public service, have been largely unaffected financially. So the country was very united during the pandemic. The economic crisis that's coming could be very divisive. So, we really need to get our economy up and running really soon. So yes, there is a European intervention, but most of what we do, and I think most of what European countries are going to do, is domestic. We had a budget surplus for the last 2 years. This year we'll have a deficit in the region of 10% of our GDP, because we have to do that. To put in place the social safety net, so that people don't fall into poverty, and now, particularly over the next few weeks and months, to get our businesses open again and growing again, with the fear always there of a second wave, which could set us back once more.
Right. Well, thank you. I want to turn to Prime Minister Brnabić on the same thing, that Serbia, despite I like seeing the European Union flag behind you, Madam Prime Minister, but Serbia doesn't yet participate or benefit from directly the same type of EU recovery program, although there are aspects for Southeast Europe. But how are you thinking about this? And specifically, President Vučić had been championing more regional economic integration in the region. And as this crisis hits, is this perhaps this initiative, is that part of a means of helping Serbia recover economically, to accelerate some of the regional integration among the Western Balkan states themselves?
Yes, well, as you noticed, the EU flag that is next to the Serbian flag is always in our institutions and in our official meetings, and I think that's just kind of a signal where we want to be and where we think we belong, and that, I think, tells more about what our strategic approach is than anything that we can verbally say. So again, although we are not members of the European Union, we are an accession country. Our economy largely depends, or almost fully depends, on how the European economy is doing. So the better, the faster EU's economy recovers, the faster our economy recover. We are especially reliant upon Germany and Italy because I would say the by far the biggest number of foreign investors in Serbia are German investors, and depending on how fast the German economy is going, that directly connects to our economy. Others as well, and EU in general. That's why when I, as the Prime Minister, when I'm looking at the numbers, I always look at our numbers and I look at the EU numbers. Currently, I would say that we've actually done very, very good in the first quarter of this year. Although we were already the first case of COVID in Serbia was registered on the 6th of March, so still in the kind of Q1. But our growth in Q1 was 5%, which was fantastic. I think this was just kind of the result of all the difficult measures that we implemented in reforms that were implemented in 2014, 15, 16, 17, and so on. Now, just today, this morning, I saw our numbers for May, and our GDP in May is likely to fall a bit over 7%, which is less than we expected, but obviously it's not good. We will see how it will develop, but as I say, it will largely depend on how fast the European Union recovers. As for the President Vučić initiative for more regional integration, and when I talk about region, we talk mostly about what's currently known as the Western Balkans. All of the Western Balkans having the desire to join the European Union. Some countries closer to that, some countries further away from that. But overall, Serbia's opinion is that the stability and prosperity of the Western Balkans, entire Western Balkans, really largely depends on all of us joining the European Union. So all of our kind of perhaps historical differences and animosities aside, both President Vučić and myself as the Prime Minister have always strongly supported other Western Balkan countries in their European path, and have advocated for both, for example, Albania and North Macedonia to open for the EU to open the negotiations with these two countries. Now, in my view, we are a small region. Serbia is by far the biggest country in the region, but we are still very, very small. The region is very small. And unless we work together, unless we are better connected, there won't be really much of a prosperity here in the region, nor will there be any condition for a different future that we owe to younger generations here in this part of region. And finally, I would say that, if you ask me, and I've been asked many, many times, why do we want to join the EU? For me, and as Xavier said, for me, European Union is first and foremost the peace project. And in that respect, I think by far the most successful peace project in the history of mankind. And we want to be part of that. We want to be part of that set of values. We think we belong there. And I think that the long-term peace and stability will come to our region once we join the European Union. And with peace and stability and better connections between us, I think that the economic prosperity will follow.
Thank you. You mentioned that the European project is built on values, and that's part of the reason why we invited all three of you to join us here today. That the three of you, as top public officials in your countries, as out leaders, have really inspired many. Even myself, I grew up in the American South, and I never quite imagined that a path of politics was a viable pathway for a gay kid in the American South. You have become political leaders in deeply Catholic countries, in Luxembourg and Ireland, a deeply Orthodox country in Serbia. Maybe Prime Minister Bettel first, and the TANAISTE after, and coming back to you, Madam Prime Minister. How did you do that, and how did being out impact your political trajectory in your country?
I had one principle: if you want to do politics, there is no use to hide feelings. If you have feelings for someone, I just have one life, so I don't want to hide the feelings I have. So when I did my coming out a few years ago, I remember the hardest part was to accept myself and to tell it to my mom. My father died, but to accept it and to say it to my mom, this was even harder to make it public. And also to my friends. But the first reaction of my friends, my mom was surprised, but all the friends said, "Finally, you tell us." So you see, it was not a surprise for my friends, but my mom still wished to marry a woman in white, and etc., etc. But at the end, everything was okay. But that was a hard part. The fact was, I was never the gay prime minister. I was the candidate. I was the mayor of the city. I was the member of parliament, and I was gay, and I never hid it, and I never had something because you spoke about the church. For me, religion is something I respect. I'm in charge of the religious affairs also in my country, but we separated church and state. For example, in Luxembourg, National Day was just a church office. It was just an office at church and a military parade. That was all. Now we have a civil ceremony. So I respect all the religions, but I do not accept that someone is telling me because of religious what I have to do or not to do in politics. So this separation was for me important. And we are still a Catholic country, and I work a lot with the different religions. But I do not accept that today some people, because of they would use political reasons or religions, they do not accept differences. I told you that we celebrate the anniversary of the end of Second World War, and that the European Union is a peace project. So I do not accept that for the moment, even in European Union, around my table, I have some countries where they try to get vote and support by blaming being different. I think that the strength of our society is these differences. Imagine we would all be the same. This would be terribly boring. But these differences to accept, as long as I do not harm someone. But I think I'm a liberal politician, so that my freedom stops where your freedom starts, and I should be able to live. So we changed laws. We separate church and state. We did abortion law. We did the gay wedding, etc., etc. We changed a lot because we think that it's on people to decide, or not on government to take your hand and to tell you what is good or not good. You have to do your choice, and we have to make the frame to make it possible for you to have choices. So to make a catalog of things, and if they do not harm someone else, that you choose yourself what is important for you or not. So there is no recipe, but just be like you are. And I was surprised because when I got married with Gauthier 5 years ago, we got letters from your president. Barack Obama was at that moment president, and Barack and Michelle wrote us a letter to say that for when they met us, they realized that it was also always normal for us, but that we did a big step. And I got letters. You said coming from the South, I got letters from my mom telling me, "I'm so happy to see that you can be successful and being gay." You know, this makes me sad. And even, I'm sorry to say, but you invite now 3 out politicians. I hope that one day nobody will care being out or not being out. And I get invitations to go in some countries where I always say to head of states or head of governments, I cannot come because I will end in jail. And they tell me, "No, not for you." I said, as long as it's the law, it's the law. I'm gay and I want to be straight for the week I'm staying in your country. So it is important to remind that being gay still today means death penalty in some countries. And so I won't accept these kind of discussions in the European Union, because then we spoke about COVID-19, we spoke about the economic crisis, but if the rules, the values of the European Union are going to disappear, then for me there is no use to have an European Union.
Thank you for that. Really appreciate that answer. It sounds like our mothers are very similar. But for our audience,
maybe my mom should contact yours.
But I'll say for our audience, Mr. Prime Minister, you have used this perch to be very eloquent against hate crimes at the United Nations. To some of your remarks at EU summits with the Arab League have made an impression, and we've noticed that. And thank you for your leadership. I'm going to, in just a minute, I'm going to turn to take some live questions from some of the participants that we have with us. But before I do that, let me turn to the TANAISTE, to Mr. Varadkar. Not only have you been an out politician in Catholic Ireland, you're the son of a father from India. I think you're the youngest leader in Irish history. How did all this come together to shape your political opportunities in Ireland?
Yeah, I suppose it just did, and Ireland had been changing and modernising as a country long before I became Prime Minister. So while I'd love to believe that I was the cause of it all, I know I wasn't. In some ways, I'm just a product of a society that has become more modern, more liberal, less religious, but still, I still very much respect religion and people who are believers. For me, I came out as gay when I was already a member of government. So, I was already established as a politician. So thankfully, I never had to be the gay politician, if you like. I'd already been serving in government before I came out. And as Xavier was saying, I think the hardest thing is coming out to yourself and then your family and friends, not to the country. I just did a radio interview, and I still haven't listened to it, by the way, but I did a radio interview and that was it, done. And I had the advantage of not having to tell anyone else because it was national news. But that really happened in the run-up to our referendum on marriage equality. We had to change our constitution to allow marriage equality. And I knew I would be campaigning for a yes vote in that referendum, but I couldn't sort of pretend to be disinterested or neutral or something like that. So that was kind of the trigger for me in many ways. And also, it wasn't a secret either. Plenty of people knew in Dublin, so I thought it was better to kind of get ahead of it as well, unless it became a story or something. Although the media here in Ireland are quite respectful of people's privacy and never actually reported it, albeit obliquely on occasion. But for me, it's been a real privilege, though, to be able to lead some of that change, to be part of that marriage equality campaign in the government that put that referendum to the people. And since then, we modernise our laws on transgender. So, it's not non-medicalised in Ireland. People can just change their the decision you make to change your gender. We've also liberalised our abortion laws in recent years as well. But we need to do some more, I think, particularly around sexual health and hate crimes as well, and hate speech, which we need to work on now in this government, in what's going to be my third government.
Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. And Madam Prime Minister, the political environment in Serbia is a little bit different, and you're the first female Prime Minister, the first out Prime Minister, but also in a country that some have criticized has made less progress on some of these issues of equality. How has this shaped your political leadership and your political career?
Yes, well, I have to say that I do envy Leon when he says that the media are respectful of privacy in Ireland. It's very, very different here in Serbia. So, I had to go through some really, really difficult times, which is okay. I wanted to be in politics. I accepted that challenge, and but it was terrible, hugely difficult for my family, and especially for my partner. But we got over it. We got through it, and now I think, one thing that does bother me is that I've been heavily criticized by LGBT community in Serbia, that I did not do anything for the LGBT community or equality in Serbia, which I have to say that I do strongly disagree, and I do attend every pride parade in Belgrade, and I talk to people who criticize me, and I have a very different view. My view is that if in the country we did not have an openly gay politician, not even a prime minister, a politician at any level, and we actually had a government who would first pass through the parliament laws that would guarantee more equality or better social status for LGBT people. If you have these two things, I think that for LGBT community, for the acceptance, for change in the country, and for equality and values in the country, it would be much more important to have someone who's out and say, I'm gay and I'm not afraid to admit it, and I'm not ashamed of it. I am who I am, and only then have laws. And my mission was, in my head, very simple, and that was, firstly, as Leo said and as Xavier said, not to be gay prime minister. My job wasn't to push for the LGBT agenda. My job was to be the prime minister who will ensure that everyone lives better in Serbia, but also to say, yes, I am gay, and yes, this is my partner, this is my family, and we are part of this society. We love this country, and we will do whatever we can to make this country stronger and better. And the second goal was to actually have, if I could have at least one gay person in Serbia feel more at ease with themselves and better about themselves when they saw me as the prime minister, openly gay, then my goal for this term in the office was achieved. I really wanted people to see, and their parents and friends and everyone else in Serbia to see that it's normal, that it's okay, and that we are people like any other people. And plus, my partner and I, our son was born during my term in the office. He's a little bit over 16 months old now, and so that was kind of again something very different. But when you look at the reactions of people when I came out, or actually when I joined the government firstly as the Minister of Public Administration and Local Government, in the government led by Aleksandar Vučić, who was then the Prime Minister, currently the President. When you saw the reactions of people then, as openly gay person joining the government, and when you compare those reactions to the news that my son was born, you could see how much our society has changed. And then in that respect, I have to say that, all the criticism aside, I'm proud with how much my coming out, or me not hiding the fact that I'm gay, and really participating in political and social life with my partner freely and openly here in Serbia, and representing Serbia abroad, has changed Serbia. I'm pleased with that. And it has been very difficult. It has been very difficult for my partner, my family, and it took a lot of sacrifice. And sometimes I am sorry that some people do not see that and don't appreciate how much we have changed in the past 4 years. But I'm doing it for my country, and hopefully people will I will see how, we just had elections. My term as the prime minister is getting close to an end. The new government will probably be formed in about 2 or 3 months, and then we'll see how things progress from there.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. You preempted a question we got from Susan Dickleth Nelson about how your prime ministership has advanced these issues in Serbia. So thank you for that. I want to bring into the conversation, I think we have I'm going to turn to Ms. Sean Skelly, who's the co-founder of Out National Security, followed by Ambassador Mike Guest. But let me start with Sean, if you are on the line with us.
I am. Thank you, Damon. And thank you, Prime Minister Bettel, Prime Minister Brnabić, and TANAISTE Varadkar. Prime Minister just addressed much of what my question was to be, and you both gentlemen spoke about it in your recent remarks about how you happen to be people, politicians, and leaders who also happen to be gay. But you are here with us as all of you three of only 5 people who have ever led a government as an out person. So what does that particular fact mean to you? And what do you think it means to your people and the rest of us here around the world that you're just one of a handful of people that have ever done this and are doing it?
That's right. That's an important fact. One of 5 out leaders. We've seen this in Iceland and Belgium before. But how does this become unremarkable, as you say, Sean? Let me just hold that question and bring in Ambassador Mike Guest, who is also with us live. Ambassador Mike Guest was a U.S. ambassador to Romania, a long career in the State Department, but has played a really remarkable role. He's senior advisor to the Council on Global Equality, a remarkable role in mainstreaming these issues as part of American foreign policy. Over to you, Mike.
Well, first, happy Pride, and let me join Damon in saying thank you for being role models to your country's young people. I want to ask about this unusual time we're experiencing in transatlantic relations. The U.S. has pulled back from its leadership role in NATO. We've gone solo, and very badly so, I think, in the response to the coronavirus epidemic. I think also this administration, the current administration, has embraced white supremacist and anti-transgender rhetoric and policies that really run counter to what America stands for in terms of equality. So help us understand how your citizens really see America right now.
Thank you. Let me come back to all 3 leaders. I might even add to Ambassador Guest. We've been warning, Fred KEMPE, our CEO, has warned of a transatlantic decoupling during this period. But we've also seen our own competition with China play out in Europe. And so as a corollary to what Ambassador Guest is asking and how folks see the transatlantic relationship, what does this mean and how are folks looking at China's presence in Europe? So maybe we'll come back with these questions as a way to wrap our conversation. Maybe I'll start with Prime Minister Bettel. How do we make this unremarkable? Future of the transatlantic relationship, and how do your people see America and China today?
So, how many hours do I have?
That's right.
The first thing, the questions of Sean Skelly is the fact that it's strange, but maybe the time is the acceptance from the populations is different today than years ago. I don't know. I live now. I cannot speak what's happened 50 or 100 years ago, but I see that young people today are much more tolerant than, because when I was a child, I remember they called me the princess and etc. So it was difficult. And when you see how many young people do suicide because they do not accept themselves, we see that today. But even if I don't want to be it's more easy in a city than I think if you live outside a city. So I say, but it depends of the countries. But I really can feel that today it might be also a question of generation, and there might be some before, but they were not able to get out. And in countries where you still have death penalty, I tell you, I'm a guest in some countries, and I always tell them that if I come, I bring my husband with me. So this is always the condition. And I had a funny story. I don't know if you heard that one. I'm sorry, it will be short. But I was once invited in a country, and I was registered with my husband, and I said that he was my partner. And they told me I should write he should be my parliamentary assistant, because this would be not very well appreciated to go with my husband to that place. And I told them that I would prefer to have the reputation to be gay than to have sex with all my staff. And then they accepted him without any problem. So you see, sometimes things are moving, and they were so surprised that they accepted it. But at the beginning, they were a bit skeptical. So sometimes you have to ask things to do them. The image of the US, you have to know that not very far away from here, I have 5,000 young guys who died for me, for my country, for my liberty. And this is something I will never forget. And I had, for the celebrations of the Battle of the Bulge, not that long time ago, a dinner with veterans. And I will not forget that they died, a lot of them died, without knowing even where my country was. I know it's not the easiest to find on a map. And they came to fight for my liberty. So this is something, the deepest respect I have for the United States, and I will keep that. We had already easier situations in the relations, but I have to tell you that we have to be honest. We have to say things. If there are troubles with an administration, we have to be able to speak about everything. And the biggest problem we have today is that we speak very much about each other, but not to each other. And so if I have to say something to a Chinese president, if I have to say something to a Russian president, if I have to say something to an American president, or to any other leader, and I have friends here with Anna and with the former and the future Taoiseach, because I'm still not able to say the Taoiseach. I don't know how it is spelled, but we are friends because we are able to speak together. So if we are not able to speak to each other, we will not be able to also find solutions for the different problems. And finally, with China, I think it's a question of respect, of being able to exchange. And if I would say this is for all the relations, of level playing field. If we do things together, it has to be in respect of rules, of international rules, and also by watching how we can do win-win situations for both, but in respect also of international rules, which I think are very important. But for the moment, I don't want to be to be very frank in your questions. I don't want to be squeezed between you both. I don't want to be squeezed between the United States and China, and to have the collateral damages of misunderstanding between both. So speak together.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Great advice. Really well said. Let me turn back to the Prime Minister of Serbia, and then we'll close out with the once and future Taoiseach. But Prime Minister Brnabić, anything you want to add on how to make this type of leadership unremarkable, or your own vision for the transatlantic relationship, your own country's relationship with the United States? Is there a possibility for a different kind of strategic partnership between our countries in the future?
How to make it unremarkable? I don't really know. I never really thought about that. I've always tried to be myself, and people can take it or leave it. And in my position as the Prime Minister, or previously as the minister, really just do the best job that I can do, and then give my whole self into this. And I was hoping that people will see that they will see the results, and that they will just start accepting me, and by accepting me, also start changing their opinions and stereotypes. And stop discriminating against LGBT people, or any other people for that matter. And I think, I'm obviously being subjective, but I think that has worked to a large extent. As again, as my friend Xavier says, it's certainly easier, I think, all over the world. That if you live in larger cities or capital cities, and if you live in smaller towns or in villages. But I do now travel very, very frequently around Serbia. I meet a lot of people, and they all welcome me without any reservations. And so then I leave those places and think that is hopefully how they will look at all other, I would say, LGBT people in their communities. I know it's still a long way to go, but you can only hope. And I always really believed in living my own life and leading by example. And I to be honest, I believe much more in examples, in real life examples, than in just following legislation, which is why my priority was that and not legislation, which is equally important. And I'm hoping that if I have a say in the next government, certainly legislation to make the lives of LGBT people in Serbia will have to follow. And also, to make it unremarkable, I also have to say, that I am the first LGBT politician in the world, in the office, who actually also got a child while in the office. So again, I'm hoping that we moved a little bit that goalpost as well. As for the transatlantic relations, the China relations, I have nothing to add to what Xavier has said. Serbia is far too small to be kind of in between the fight of the giants, and I always, our foreign policy in those respect is in that respect is that we don't want to be the grass on which the elephants are fighting. So we are really trying to mind our own business and try to have good open channels of communication and cooperation with both the United States and China. Our strategic focus is to become member of the European Union, but also to have cooperation with other countries like India and United Arab Emirates and many other places, because that's what our people need in terms of getting more jobs, better paid jobs, better prosperity, better quality of life. So that is our policy.
Thank you, Madam Prime Minister. And let me turn. I like what Prime Minister Bettel said, the title of once and future Taoiseach. Back to you, Mr. Varadkar.
Thanks very much. I think the fact that there's only been 5 of us who've led governments under LGBT is sad, because there must have been many more who just didn't come out or couldn't come out. But I just hope that as there are more and more of us, that it becomes less relevant and less remarkable. Maybe like having female prime ministers in Denmark or New Zealand. Once you have a few, it's not such a big deal anymore, and so perhaps that's where we'll get to. I think for Irish people, we always feel a very special connection to America. So many Irish people went to America, and so many Americans consider themselves to be of Irish heritage, and we speak the same language, watch the same television, very same culturally, and we don't feel that America is a foreign country, and I don't think that will ever change. I hope it never does. But I do think there is a sadness in Ireland that we don't really have American leadership anymore, because generally speaking, for most of the last century, if not longer, the United States has been a force for good in the world, and a country that you kind of look up to. We're talking about LGBT issues. We didn't mention that the battle for LGBT equality began in New York and Stonewall, and there was a time when America was ahead of the world on so many issues such as this. And it's not that country anymore. At least at the moment, it's not that country anymore. But perhaps that'll change in November, and America will be back.
Thank you, sir. Let me just wrap us up by saying, first, at the Atlantic Council, we understand that America's strength at home, its renewal at home, is fundamentally related to its role in the world. Our Atlantic Council team believes that we are stronger with friends and allies. We advocate for constructive American engagement, working alongside your nations to solve big problems. That's what we're here for. That's what we fight for every day. The transatlantic relationship should be a force for good in the world, particularly in a world that's being challenged right now, that this is the spine of the free world. And I think that's something that we're very much committed to. Not that any Europeans feel hedged, that they have to hedge between the US or China or squeezed, but that we're actually on the same team, shaping a better future. So that's why we're delighted to welcome you to our platform. Thank you for your leadership, what you're doing. I'm going to turn over to Vicente Garcia and our team to close us out. Vicente is our Director of Events and Special Initiatives, the producer of this program, and the driving force behind the Atlantic Council's LGBT initiative as well. Over to you, Vicente, to close us out.
Thank you, Damon. And thank you all for that insightful, inspiring, and candid conversation. My name is Vicente Garcia. I'm the Director of Events and Special Initiatives at the Atlantic Council, as Damon mentioned, and as the Secretary of our LGBTI Advisory Council. As our excellencies and Damon discussed, the entire world is navigating one of the most uncertain times in our history. As the transatlantic community continues to confront the coronavirus, the systemic society injustice remains a prevalent issue. Yet this discussion reminds us that LGBTI leaders, such as today's guests, have been critical for championing constructive solutions to global challenges. So on behalf of all of us today, I'd like to sincerely thank Prime Minister Xavier Bettel of Luxembourg, Prime Minister Brnabić of Serbia, and Chief Minister Varadkar of Ireland for making such strides in equality and global solidarity in this time of need. We close out this Pride Month with a deeper resolve and a renewed call to fight for justice and equality around the world. We must continue to celebrate and honor the enormous impact of the LGBTI community has had on history, inspire the next generation of leaders who will continue to light the way forward. And the Atlantic Council sincerely hopes this upcoming period will be one in which the United States can continue to advance the rights of the LGBTI community. To wrap up this iteration of AC Front Page, I invite you to join us next month for more episodes featuring the Director General of the World Trade Organization, the President of Singapore, the Prime Minister of Singapore, and the Prime Minister of Poland. And you can go to our website, atlanticcouncil.org/AC Front Page for more information. So thank you, happy Pride, and we'll see you next time.